Hi, I'm Hannah, and today I'm going to teach you how to make this adorable vintage Christmas tree ornament with beaded accents. So let's get started. All the materials you need are listed in the description, and I have links to some things that I personally really like to use, but you can pretty much go to Hobby Lobby or Michael's and find basically everything you need to get started. I have a bunch of different needles and containers and scissors and all that, and I like to keep it all in a little zipper pouch that I can take with me. For this project, I'm using a medium weight cotton fabric, and I have a whole bunch of different embroidery floss colors. The exact colors are in the description with the numbers. All of them are DMC embroidery floss from Michael's, but I have different tones of green and orange and brown. You can pretty much use whatever you want. I just like those because they're vintage colors. Then I have the set of beads I also got at Michael's, and yeah, I'm going to put a few of them on. This embroidery hoop I got from Amazon, and these are just really, really great to embroider in, and then you enclose it without having to move your embroidery. So they're a little bit tricky to get out, but once you get it out, you're going to put the white part underneath your fabric, put the faux wood piece on top, and you might have to wrestle with it a little bit. You can see here, I actually had to pause and fight with it for a little bit because this one was particularly difficult to get on. Then once it's on, you're going to smooth all the edges on the back side, and I'm going to trim it to have 1 inch of fabric all the way around. As you can see here, I already did that for this piece. That just gives us enough space to be able to do a running stitch to close it, but also not long enough it's going to catch while we're stitching. So with my fabric pen, I'm going to start sketching out the design for my tree. I'm going to have 4 layers, each progressively getting a little bit bigger and wider as I move down, and I'm going to leave a space in between. I'm only drawing the marks that I want to do my darkest green floss with, because then I'll go over later with my lighter floss to add a little bit of a highlight that's going to fill in the blank space. Take your time with this. It certainly does not have to be perfect at all. I'm going to start with about 18 to 24 inches of my floss. I'm going to knot it and then start at the very top of my tree. All of my stitches are just going to be straight stitches, so I'm going to try to follow the lines that I've created, and I'm just going to start back at the top with every stitch. Making stitches in different directions. I have some on the edges that are a little bit shorter and a little bit more angled to the side. None of my stitches are completely equal. I just have some that are longer, some that are shorter, and I just keep going until I like it. The top layer is done, and now I am moving on to my second layer. And like I said before, I'm just going to follow these blue lines that I made. I'm not going to stress about following each one perfectly, but just using them as a guide. And I'm going to keep going until I get all the way down to the bottom. Now I'm going to start on my lighter green floss to add a highlight to the tree. I'm going to start at the very top and make some stitches about 1/3 to 1/2 down the layer. And again, I'm going to use varying lengths of stitches. Some will be longer, some shorter. And at the left and right edges, I'm going to have them slightly at an angle. And you're going to do this for all your layers. Once I finish this top layer, for my second dark green layer, I'm going to start at the base of the first layer and then do my stitches 1/3 to 1/2 down on the second green layer. So you'll see when I get there, but there's not going to be any blank space in between my dark green layers because that is where my lighter green is going to go. And because I'm doing varying lengths, it's going to look feathered and not just a clean line across. I've noticed that when people try to make their stitches too even or too uniform, it doesn't look very natural. But when you have a little bit of variation, it just adds to it looking a little bit more realistic. I'm going to do this for every layer until I get to the bottom. My tree is done, and now I'm going to move on and do the trunk of the tree with my darker brown floss first. I'm just doing a basic stitch. Some people call this a satin stitch, some people call it a back stitch. I don't actually technically know the terms for it. All I know is that I'm going up and down many times until I fill in this small section. Now onto the lighter brown floss. I'm just going to add a few stitches to Make it feel like it has some highlights on it, that it's not just a one-dimensional color. So I'll probably just do a few stitches here, and that'll be it for our tree. And then we can move on to some fun ornaments. It's time for a whole bunch of French knots. Once you pull your thread up through the front side, you're going to wrap your needle once with your floss, put it back into the hole that it came out of, and then hold it with your left hand slightly taut, not super tight, and then gently pull that floss through until a knot forms. That first one I did was actually not that great, so let's do that again. You're going to pull it through the front side. You're going to gently wrap a loop around your needle. It's not tight, it's just snug. Stick it back in the hole. Hold the floss with the other hand as you gently pull it through until it forms a knot. And a lot of times I see people pulling them really tightly. French knots do not need to be pulled very tightly. They just need to be snug against the surface of your fabric. So you can also do a double loop around your needle, and that will give you a bigger French knot. But for this, I'm just going to do a single wrap around my needle because I like them looking small, as I'm going to put a lot of them on. You can truly do whatever colors you want. For this vintage tree, I chose some soft muted colors. So I don't exactly know how to describe this one. It's kind of a light, soft orange, maybe more of a muted mauve. I'm not sure, but I really loved how it looked. So I'm going to put this one on in a bunch of knots all throughout. The last color I chose for this tree is kind of a burnt orange. It's a nice contrast against the lighter colors. I tend to use too many light colors, and I'm often afraid to go dark, but I find that when I go darker than I'm comfortable with and maybe a little lighter than I'm comfortable with, that it just makes things extra beautiful for some reason, and I'm not exactly sure why. But this is me moving a little bit outside my comfort zone and using a color that is still kind of that warm orangey tone, but still definitely darker. Now for the beads, I'm going to cut a strand of floss, and I'm going to pull 1 to 2 of the strands apart, and I'm going to be stitching all of my beads with just 1 or 2 strands. So I'm going to stitch up through my fabric, string a bead, and then place my needle very, very close to where my initial hole was. And I picked these little bronze beads to start. They are so cute and add a touch of sparkle. And I'm going to just equally disperse them throughout the whole tree. Now I'm going to go all out and use this little star bead I found from Michael's. I'm going to use the rest of the embroidery floss that I didn't use for my beads, and I'm going to stitch up through the front, string the star bead, and then I'm going to stitch it, make a stitch small enough so that it sits tightly, and I'm actually going to have to go run through it again because I didn't feel like it was quite as snug. You can absolutely do a French knot instead of a bead, but I just felt like, you know what, this already has a little sparkle, we might as well just go all out. It's time to enclose the back. I'm getting 18 to 24 inches of floss. You can pick any color that you want, and I'm just going to do a basic running stitch. So pushing it down and up and down and up all around the back of this extra fabric piece that we have on the back, just so that we can make it nice and tight and ready to stitch our felt onto. Now that the back is completely enclosed, I have a piece of felt cut a little bit smaller than the back of my embroidery. It's big enough to cover the running stitch, but also small enough to leave me that ring of fabric around that I'm going to stitch it to. I insert the needle through the top piece of the felt, and this is going to be where my first stitch is. So I'm going to pull it through, and I'm going to insert it back at the top of my fabric ring and inserting it at a 45-degree angle, and it's going to come out right here, a tiny bit away from my first stitch. So you're not going to see under the surface where the angled stitch is happening. You're just going to see what look like straight stitches all the way around. So again, I stick it in at a 45-degree angle, pull it through, and I try to make the spaces between the stitches even, and it takes a lot of practice. The first few times I did it, it looked very wonky. Totally fine if yours turns out wonky. Make sure it doesn't hook around the top of your embroidery, but just a lot more practice, and it turns out really nice. So I'm gonna go all the way around with this stitch. My final stitch is not going to be done at an angle. I'm going to put it straight through, and I'm going to pull my needle through, and I'm going to pull it very tightly. I'm going to go through it again and run my needle through the little hole, the loop that I made, tie it off, and then I'm actually going to run it through one last time, and then I will trim the tail off of it. And there we go. And it is completely done with the stitching. It is super cute. Can't wait to get it rinsed off. Don't mind my messy sink, but give your embroidery a quick rinse to get all of the blue fabric marker off. And you can set it out to dry. I sometimes let mine dry overnight. You can put it in front of a fan. Just give it a little bit of time to dry. And there you go. A beautiful, tiny little embroidery ready for your Christmas decor. Thanks so much for joining me today.